This is Letter from America. Today's topic, Job Sikhala and his lawyer go hunting for frightened and elusive prosecutor and judge to try his case. Where in the world have you ever heard of a prisoner and his lawyer looking for the evasive and frightened prosecutor and judge to try his or her case? Well, how about Zimbabwe? And just this last week. This might sound like fiction, but it wasn't. Job Sikhala and his lawyer came to court for the start of a full trial. But the prosecutor and the judge were not present. Job Sikhala and his lawyer had to look for the prosecutor and the magistrate in order to try him. They were in hiding. They were not available. When Job Sikhala and his lawyer found them, the prosecutor and judge gave some lame excuses that they could not come. Imagine that. Job Sikhala is a political prisoner. His case is falling apart, and the trumped-up charges against him are under the spotlight of the international community, especially the Commonwealth team that recently visited Zimbabwe on a fact-finding mission. Last week's statement issued by the Commonwealth delegation, which visited Zimbabwe from 12 to 17 November, showed clearly that Zimbabwe is very far from satisfying the conditions for readmission into the Commonwealth. Attempt by the ZANU-PF Dizzy Rivachinoi to impress the Commonwealth by granting bail to CCC member Godfrey Sithole, who was jailed with Job Sikhala 5 months ago, as well as the Nyatsime 14, was a dismal failure. ZANU-PF had hoped to score some very cheap points in the futile hope that the Commonwealth delegation would recommend Zimbabwe's readmission. Given the rampant acts of politically motivated violence perpetrated by ZANU-PF throughout the country, it was foolish that anyone would come to the remotest conclusion that basic human rights and the rule of law were slowly returning to Zimbabwe. The Commonwealth statement was very diplomatic. It read in part that Zimbabwe has made, quote, impressive progress in its journey to rejoin the Commonwealth family. It also read, "This is encouraging and we hope that further progress will be made." The statement continued, "The mission by the Commonwealth forms part of the broader membership process and we look forward to advancing this further. All the stakeholders we engaged in," the Commonwealth statement continued, "the government, opposition parties, civil society organizations, religious leaders, and indeed the people of Zimbabwe are supportive of Zimbabwe coming back to the family." The statement concluded, "We will work together towards that shared goal to ensure this process reaches its proper conclusion." ZANU-PF propagandists were quick to jump into ecstatic fits of jubilation and prematurely and falsely declared that they would soon rejoin the Commonwealth. One such propagandist declared that it's no longer if but when Zimbabwe would rejoin the Commonwealth. The propagandists for ZANU-PF, that is, did not know that the statement by the Commonwealth delegation was a diplomatic way of encouraging real reforms. What ZANU-PF could not and will not be able to hide is widespread politically motivated violence against the citizens of Zimbabwe. Neither can ZANU-PF claim that the rule of law prevails in the country. Job Sikhala, Godfrey Sithole, and the Nyatsime 14 are a textbook example of just how ZANU-PF manipulates the law. What is increasingly becoming evident is that ZANU-PF prosecutors cannot argue logically or rationally their case against Sikhala. They failed miserably when Sikhala briefly appeared in court for bail hearing, which he has been denied more than 10 times. The problem is that ZANU-PF controls the judiciary. It dictates whom to arrest or to jail and for how long. In the 42 years Zimbabwe has been independent, Sikhala has been arrested 67 times. But he has not been found guilty on any of the charges leveled against him. The recent case would have been his 68th, and he would have been found not guilty again. But ZANU-PF has this time insisted that its orders must be obeyed by the judges. The last judge, Justice Ndewere, who granted Sikhala bail, was removed from her position and is undergoing untold harassment and hardships from ZANU-PF. From the way Sikhala's case has dragged on, judges and prosecutors appear frightened to handle his case. This week has so far shown how no one seems interested in trying Sikhala. According to an online publication, Nehanda, Sikhala and his lawyers turned up at the court last Monday. They spent the whole day at the court without anyone attending to them. But neither the prosecutor nor the magistrates was available. Seeing that no one was available for a full trial, Sikhala and his lawyer opted for bail application. Sikhala's lawyer, Jeremiah Bamu, was quoted in Nehanda. He said, "We were supposed to proceed to trial on the case in which he is charged for obstructing the course of justice. Apparently, the state did not have the prosecutor to handle the case," Bamu said. "We ended up taking the option to apply for bail under changed circumstances. But once again, the state was not ready and there was no prosecutor to help us. We were tossed from one court to another," Bamu said. This was a clear indication that the judiciary is conflicted on how to handle Sikhala's case. The judiciary know only too well that Sikhala has absolutely no case to answer. They also know that they must obey ZANU-PF orders to deny him bail. But the judiciary know that the world is watching how efficient they are at passing judgments based on facts of the cases. The judiciary know their reputation is at risk. One day, some of these judges will, out of necessity, leave the country for better pastures elsewhere in the world. Or they will face public pressure to explain how they could have incriminated Sikhala when they were aware there was absolutely no case against him. It stands out that no judge will grant Sikhala bail for fear of retribution from ZANU-PF. The continued jailing of Sikhala on trumped-up charges is working against ZANU-PF. As a matter of fact, the Commonwealth delegation was made aware of this despite the last-minute granting of bail to others. But that is not all. ZANU-PF cannot explain why ZANU-PF supporters openly and loudly called for the killing of opposition supporters, but nothing happened to them. They have not been arrested. They are walking free on the streets. Other cases involving the persecution of political opponents of ZANU-PF have included human rights activists like Joanna Momombe, an MP, Cecilia Chimbiri and Dinetsai Maroa, who were arrested for participating in a peaceful protest. According to the report from the Zimbabwe Peace Project, they were charged with alleged stage managing their abduction, and their case dragged on for more than 28 months. Since their arrest, the three women have been in and out of court and suffered torture, harassment, and degrading treatment. According to the Zimbabwe Peace Project, alarmingly, on September 29, a CCC activist, Felix Biri, was reportedly abducted by ZANU activists in Nyatsime. He was allegedly forcibly taken from his home, beaten, tortured, and later dumped at the police, CID, law and order offices. The victim appeared in court on October 1, charged with inciting public violence. He was denied bail and remanded in custody to October 11. Opposition activists and human rights defenders continue to be victims of abductions and torture, while the government denies accusations and sometimes blames a third force and falsehoods, the Zimbabwe Peace Project reports. On September 29, Zimbabwean author and activist Tsitsi Dangarembwa and fellow protester Julie Barnes were both found guilty of inciting violence when they marched in Harare, holding placards calling for institutional and political reforms. The Zimbabwe Peace Project reports that the two were arrested in July 2020, and more than 2 years later, they were sentenced to 6 months in prison, suspended on condition that they pay a fine. Their conviction for exercising the right to demonstrate and petition violates their constitutional rights and should not be criminalized in Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwe Peace Project comments. But the big elephant in the room is politically motivated violence perpetrated by ZANU-PF. According to the Zimbabwe Peace Project report, on September 11, a hand grenade was reported to have exploded close to Gadzema Stadium in Chinhoyi, where CCC leader Nelson Chamisa was scheduled to address a rally. The opposition party stated that the grenade thrown from a moving vehicle was an act of intimidation by suspected state agents and ZANU-PF thugs. Such acts of violence display high levels of political intolerance as the country enters into the shadows of the next election, signifying how potentially violent the election will be, the Zimbabwe Peace Project commented. The Zimbabwe Peace Project's report on politically motivated violence in the month of September is jarring. It speaks volumes about how ZANU-PF has reached a new low in inflicting violence and hardships on innocent Zimbabweans. The Zimbabwe Peace Project reported a surge in political intolerance and violent incidents in Zimbabwe. There was a total of 272 human rights violations, an increase from August's 257. Some of the hotspots on human rights violations were Harare with 47, followed by Mashonaland Central with 41, Manicaland with 38, and Mashonaland East with 36. The Zimbabwe Peace Project launched a Resist, Reject, and Report Violence campaign, or #RRRV2023, to document and expose perpetrators of politically motivated violence and create an active citizenry that resists, rejects, and reports violence. Zimbabwe is at that time where one ought to look out for the other, as human rights violations continue and mainly affect ordinary citizens. A mobile app, SPECC, developed by the Zimbabwe Peace Project, empowers citizens to report any social, political, economic, civil, and cultural violations in Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwe Peace Project aims to contribute to a peaceful electoral process where citizens are empowered to reject politicians who incite them to engage in politically motivated violence. The September monitor of the Zimbabwe Peace Project showed that ZANU-PF topped the list of human rights violators by contributing 45.3% of all perpetrators of human rights violations. This was followed by the Zimbabwe Republic Police at 27% and the municipal police at 4.8%, with 4.3% attributed to CCC. Municipal police were involved in demolishing informal traders' structures during the month. The continued swell in ZANU-PF's contribution to perpetrating human rights violations can be attributed to the increasing party campaign activities in preparation for the 2023 elections, with citizens coerced to attend party meetings and instructed on who they should elect against their will. The general citizens comprised most of the September human rights violation victims of over 86%, the Zimbabwe Peace Project reported. The monitor observed an increase from 10.5% in August to 12.4% of the CCC victims. Persons with disability victims decreased to 0.3% for women and 0.2% for men. The Zimbabwe Peace Project also reports that on September 12, students at the University of Zimbabwe embarked on a peaceful #FeesMustFall demonstrations against tuition fee hikes of up to 1,000%. Despite the peaceful demonstrations, 3 female students were arrested and assaulted by the police and sustained severe injuries. Another 14 students were arrested, while 5 more were arrested 2 days later, the Zimbabwe Peace Project reported. The students were charged with violating the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act Section 59 of the Constitution, which provides that every person has the right to demonstrate and present petitions. Though the Higher and Tertiary Education Minister Amon Mwirwira defended the fee hike, arguing that the government was already subsidizing, the fees were later reviewed down after the students petitioned Parliament, the Zimbabwe Peace Project reported. Another report from the Zimbabwe Peace Project notes that on September 23, Vice President Constantino Chiwenga's ailing ex-wife, Mary Mubaiwa, had part of her right arm amputated at a local healthcare institution after several unsuccessful appeals to the courts to have her passport and get specialized treatment abroad had been denied. Mubaiwa is accused of violating the Marriages Act and attempted murder. These are allegations, we must point out. The continued targeted persecution through the prosecution of Mary Mubaiwa shows the failure of the state to promote and uphold women's rights, including the right to health. The Zimbabwe Peace Project reported, and the Zimbabwe Peace Project reports that the religious leaders have become major instigators of human rights violations. These leaders abused their congregation members primarily in apostolic and Pentecostal churches. During community activities, the Zimbabwe Peace Project learned that several apostolic leaders in Chiredzi Ward 7 take young underage girls to pray for many days, exposing them to sexual assault and forced marriages at a young age. In the Mahenye area in Chiredzi, a 13-year-old girl was married to a prophet named Madzibaba Terminate. While religion unites people from various backgrounds, it is disheartening that people blindly accept their leaders' orders despite violating their rights, the Zimbabwe Peace Project commented. All these human rights violations are being monitored by the international community. The United Nations Human Rights Council has Zimbabwe on a watch list for human rights violations. The Commonwealth delegation that visited Zimbabwe will also have large amounts of information about human rights violations. The big question is, what will the international community do about Zimbabwe? It is hard to say, but an even bigger question is, what will Zimbabweans do about their oppression? The former United States Secretary of State, Colin Powell, once said, Zimbabweans must take action now before there is nothing left of their country. He was referring to the massive damage and looting of the country by ZANU-PF. Will Zimbabweans engage in mass demonstrations such as happened in other countries? Iran is a classic example where the citizens have continued to protest despite the heavy military presence of the state police and the army. Are Zimbabweans aware of this? That in other countries, citizens are protesting, are staging mass demonstrations. Will Zimbabweans, at some point in the near future, take up the rallying cry of Zakwana, Sokwanele, and enough, and like their compatriots in Iran and in other countries march against the ZANU-PF Dizzy Pachinoi regime? Or could it be that Zimbabweans who will actually dismantle ZANU-PF and remove it from the face of earth are not yet born? That remains to be seen.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation